Hey guys, what's up? So we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. Now, you may notice that there's a guitar on either side of me, and you're probably wondering what this has to do with trans rights or feminism, but just stick around, you'll get it. Okay, now, these are both clearly guitars. I don't think anyone would argue with that. That word tells us a few things about them. For example, we know that these are both wooden objects with metal strings which can be tuned and strummed to make music. We can tell all of those things about them just by using the word guitar no matter which one we're talking about. When you want to make music on this guitar, you strum it. And the vibration from the strings resonates inside the body and comes out through this hole right here. Now, this is a pretty common type of guitar, and when most people hear the word guitar, this is going to be the first thing that they'll think of. However, this is obviously also a guitar, and just like that one, I can strum the strings to make music. But it doesn't sound very happy. I guess that's to be expected. This is definitely a guitar, but it's clearly also pretty different from this one. With the other guitar, the sound was amplified by having a hollow body and a hole, but this guitar doesn't have a hole where that one does. Instead, where that guitar has a hole, this guitar has these things on the front that stick out. They're called pickups, and they're electromagnets that generate a small current from the vibration of the strings and then transfer that current out as a signal through this cable jack right here. Now we know that this guitar is pretty happy on its own. If I want to take it somewhere and make music, I can do it just like this. This guitar, though, is clearly not happy. It still exists and it's making music, technically. But if you ask me, it sounds pretty depressed. What can we do about that? Well, in order for this guitar to be happy, it's going to need a few extra things. It's going to want a cable, an amplifier, an electricity source, and probably an effects pedal. I say want, but the reality is that these things are not cosmetic or optional. They're mandatory. In order for this guitar to be able to play, it's going to need these things. Now, some people think it's greedy to want things, but it's actually pretty normal and unselfish to want things that you literally need. And obviously these things are going to cost me a little chunk of change, but really if I want this guitar to be happy, I don't have any other choice. And when I get all that and plug the cable in, this guitar is pretty happy. So even though these guitars are both real, they're obviously quite different. So if I wanted to talk about one of them, how would you know which one I was talking about if I just used the word guitar? Got it. We can come up with a new word for this guitar. We can call this an electric guitar because it produces its sound electronically. Now, most people are going to be happy with just calling this one a guitar, and for a long time before there were any electric guitars, that's what this was called. But since these are both guitars, if we just say guitar when we are trying to refer very specifically to this one as opposed to this one, that's really going to feel a bit discriminatory and not at all accurate. So we can call this one an acoustic guitar because it produces its sound by means of acoustic resonation. That might seem like an unnecessary distinction at first, but it's actually pretty crucial. If I were going to perform at a venue, the equipment I would need in order to be able to perform would change pretty drastically depending on which of these guitars I brought. If I were bringing this one, I'd need cables and an effects pedal and a preamp in order for the sound to get through to the speakers. If I was bringing this one, that equipment wouldn't do me any good whatsoever. I'd really need a second microphone. Now let's talk a little bit more about just the word guitars on its own. When I say that, I'm literally referring to all guitars. If I went to a store named The Guitar Store, I would be very, very shocked to find out that that store was intended only for selling acoustic guitars. It would seem a little bit discriminatory, once again, entirely inaccurate. And it would be just as inaccurate if I defined the word guitar as a wooden instrument with metal strings and a hollow resonating body with a hole. A guitar doesn't have to have a hollow resonating body or a hole in order to be a guitar. So it's important to be able to call this guitar an acoustic guitar because that's what it is. It's just a fact. It's not an electric guitar, it is an acoustic guitar. They're different, that's just a fact, and so we are going to think of and treat them differently. There's no getting around that, but we can still definitely think of them and treat them equally. Things can be different and still equal. We can love the kind of music this guitar makes while also loving the kind of music this guitar makes. The two concepts are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, they make perfect sense, because if I say I love guitars, I'm literally saying I love both of these things. Now, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find anyone who'd be offended by the kind of music this guitar makes. People are pretty well used to it. For the longest time, this was the only way people thought of guitars. Reasonable, well-educated people don't think this kind of guitar is offensive either. But some people still do to this day. It's really probably because there are quite a few people still around who grew up in a time when this was pretty new and different, and it wasn't exactly what they were used to considering music. Sometimes people don't like it, and they might call it shit. That's generally not considered to be a very polite word at all. It's pretty fucking offensive to call a kind of music shit. When those people are talking about this kind of music, they'd probably just call it guitar music. They'd be averse to using the word acoustic because of the fact that they don't consider electric guitar music to be real music, and so they feel like the modifier is just unnecessary. And even if they choose to say electric guitar music instead of shit when they're talking about this kind of music, they're probably still saying it with a negative connotation. They may as well still be saying shit. And if someone who appreciates all kinds of guitar music like I do said acoustic specifically in reference to this type of music, they'd probably be offended. They'd be more likely to make the assumption that I was insinuating that I thought acoustic guitar music was shit because they're only used to placing a modifier in front of the phrase guitar music when they're getting ready to say something negative about it. Now, I'm not saying anything offensive about the acoustic guitar music, and I don't think of it in any negative sense at all. I like them both equally, they're just two different types of guitar music. And really no one thinks anything negative about this kind of guitar music just because it's not electric. Even hardcore metal fans enjoy acoustic guitars too. Acoustic guitars never carry the negative connotation for being acoustic that electric guitars carry just for being electric. No one would ever dream of banning acoustic guitars from a church's guitar services or a guitar festival, even if they were avid fans of electric guitars. Electric guitars could easily expect to be banned from both of these things, especially if ignorant and backwards people were in charge, and especially if we were talking about, like, a guitar service at a church. And once again, since I'm a reasonable, well-educated person who knows that electric guitar music is real music and would never dream of calling it something offensive like shit, I think it also goes without saying that I'm not saying anything offensive when I call this guitar acoustic. It's just what it is. It's a fact. So wouldn't it seem a bit weird if, like, the majority of people were offended by that? I mean, can you imagine for a moment if you asked someone what kind of guitar they had, and they asked you what the fuck you were talking about, and tried to explain that they just have a guitar? Or if they explained that they didn't have an electric guitar, but it wasn't an acoustic guitar either, because it was just a normal guitar? What if you were working at a guitar store, and a customer saw all the electric guitars, and decided to ask where the real guitars were? But if you found them an acoustic guitar and it was sitting with a bunch of electrics around it, and they were concerned that the guitar you found for them might become an electric guitar because of its exposure to them, wouldn't you start to think that they probably had a few nuts and bolts loose up there? So why don't we bat an eyelash when people talk that way about trans people and cis people? Food for thought. As always, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, remember that electric guitars are awesome, and be yourself.